Namo Buddhaya. Hello everyone, I'm Reverend Vyahalindasara. This is episode 6, The Story of the Buddha. Okay, let's start the story. Everywhere, there was great rejoicing on that day. Horses with gleaming armor, and with their riders in bright uniforms, each attended by their own standard bearers, carrying their colorful flags, gathered in the palace square. Siddhartha has won the horse riding and is leading in the archery contest too, cried the cowards excitedly. He easily won every contest that was held. Now that he had proved his skill in the arts of war, his father held a blanket to choose a bride for him, to which the neighboring kings gladly sent their daughters. To everyone's surprise, Siddhartha chose his own beautiful cousin, Yasodhara. Her father willingly gave her in marriage to the gallant prince. They lived in great splendor in a new palace, surrounded by everything delightful and pleasant. As time went by, the palace with all its luxuries and amusements made Siddhartha bored and restless. Also, all the efforts of King Suddhodana to make his son worldly minded only increased the prince's curiosity to see the world outside. So, one day, he summoned the royal charioteer, Channa, to take him for a drive on the outskirts of the palace. Channa chose a beautiful chariot drawn by a white horse. The people rejoiced to see their handsome prince driving toward the streets. They had not gone very far when they saw a hunched up old man by the roadside. This was a very unusual sight for the prince. He stopped the horse. "Who is that? He looks like a man, but his hair is white. He has no teeth. His cheeks are sunken, and his skin is wrinkled. He is weak and bent, and he is leaning on a stick. What sort of man is that?" "That is an old man," replied Channa. "He has lived for a very long time." "Does everyone get old, Channa? Will my beautiful Yasodhara get old? And you, yourself, will I get old too?" Siddhartha was very greatly disturbed by what he had seen. On another day, when he was out with Channa, they saw a sick man. He was so weak that he could not stand up but rolled on the ground, crying with pain. His body was covered with sores and his mouth was foaming. Channa explained that anyone could fall ill at any time. On the third visit outside the palace, they saw a funeral procession pass by. The mourners were wailing with grief, crying the corpse. "Why are they carrying that man?" Siddhartha was amazed. "That, my lord, is a dead man." In answer to more questions for the prince, Chan explained that death is the end of life and that it is common to all who are born. "Yes, even you and your princess Yasodhara must surely die one day, my lord. There is nothing you can do about it," emphasized Channa clearly, heedless of the king's orders. Siddhartha felt almost ill at this realization. "Let us return to the palace at once," he said. "I don't want to go any further." On their way back, they were met by an unaccustomed sight. It was a man wearing a yellow robe and whose head was shaved. His calm and peaceful appearance impressed the prince. Chan explained that this was a sage, one who had given up home and family to find a way to end suffering. At the palace, his stepmother asked him why he seemed to be so sad. "I have learned that all living beings grow old and ugly, get ill and die. I am sad when I think about all this," was Siddhartha's quiet reply. Siddhartha had now seen the four special signs, which would change his life as predicted by the sages and wise men at his birth. The king was deeply grieved that all the precautions he had taken had failed to protect his son. However, when a son was born to Princess Yasodhara, he was overjoyed and held a grand feast to celebrate the birth of the grandchild. He hoped that Siddhartha would not leave his wife and baby now. The prince attended the feast but was preoccupied with his own thoughts. I must become like that, the peaceful, calm person we saw in the street, dressed in yellow, seeking the way to end suffering. I shall renounce the world this very day. I have lived a very empty and superficial life all this year. As the evening wore on, he dozed off as he had no interest in the amusements provided. The dancers and musicians, seeing that the prince was asleep, stopped their dancings and singing and lay down the rest, but soon fell asleep. When he woke up, he was surprised to see everyone around him fast asleep. What a change scene it was! Dancers and singers, who had seemed so elegant before, were now sprawled about, some snoring, some grinding their teeth. It was a very unpleasant sight. His disillusionment with life in the world was complete. He tiptoed out of the room and asked Channa to saddle his favorite horse, Kantaka. Then he went to Yasodhara's apartments and looked into the bedroom very quickly. She was fast asleep, embracing the baby in her arms. Siddhartha was only 29 years old. With a heavy heart, but with a strong determination, he tore himself away from them and rode out of the palace gates with Channa. When they reached the river near Ranchana, he dismounted, cut off his hair, and took off all his princely clothes and jewelry. He handed them all to Channa and ordered him to return to the palace, taking the horse with him. Channa was very sad. He begged the prince to let him stay with him, but Siddhartha was firm in his refusal. Above all, he wanted Channa to return to the royal family and tell them not to grieve over his departure, because he would one day return to them when his quest was complete. Channa prepared to leave, but this time Kantaka refused to move. Siddhartha spoke to him gently and persuaded him to go with Channa. But Kantaka knew that he would never see the prince again, and he was so sad that he kept looking back longingly at his master and died of a broken heart on the way. Siddhartha exchanged his princely clothes for those of a beggar and walked alone. He was no longer prince, but the homeless ascetic, Gautama in search of the truth. He went to Alara, Kalama and Uddaka, well-known teachers of the time. Siddhartha studied very hard until one day Alara said, "I have nothing more to teach you. You are equal to me now. Will you stay and help me with my pupils? Can you not teach me how to escape from death, illness and old age?" asked Gautama. "No," said Alara. "No one in the world knows that." So he continued his search with other teachers, and not being satisfied, wandered alone once again. At this stage, he joined 5 other ascetics. Their names were Kondanya, Bhaddiya, Vappa, Mahanama and Assaji. Together, they practiced self-control and self-mortification, that is, going without the normal needs of food and rest, sleeping on the hard ground and generally leading a very uncomfortable and hard life. They believed that to become spiritually pure, one had to torture the body The ascetic Gautama became so weak that one day he collapsed with hunger and pain. He was found by a shepherd who fed him on milk and looked after him till he became strong. He realized that a life of mortification was useless. He knew from experience that the life of luxury which he had enjoyed as a prince was also futile. He therefore decided to follow a course between these two extremes, the middle path. He started to relive a normal life. The 5 ascetics were disappointed in him and left him. He was determined to seek the truth alone, unaided by teachers and companions. At this time, there lived in a neighboring village a woman called Sujata. She had a baby son, and to fulfill a vow which she had made, she prepared a very special dish of milk rice as an offering and came to the same grove where the ascetic Gautam was meditating. When Sujata saw the beautiful and serene figure sitting under a banyan tree, she was overcome with awe. She made her offering and said, "Venerable sir, however you may be, God or human, please accept this milk rice and may you attain that goal which you seek." He took the offering. Then he bathed in the river and sat on its bank and ate the milk rice. After this, he returned to the river and placed the empty bowl on the water and said, "May this bowl float upstream if I am to attain enlightenment." The bowl did float upstream. He returned to the shade of a tree and with complete faith in himself, started to meditate. He resolved, "I shall not move from here until I have attained full enlightenment." And he spent the whole evening in this meditation posture. Many thoughts came to distract him from his goal. There were thoughts of his beloved wife and child, memories of his luxurious home, of parents and friends, of feats and of sports. All this flashed before his eyes. But he was not tempted. With determined will, he continued to meditate until his mind became pure and clear. He emerged as the fully enlightened one, the Buddha. The search of 6 long years had ended. It was a day when the full moon shone, casting a bright silver light on the whole countryside, a day in the month of Vesak. May. The Buddha was 35 years old and, for a week, following enlightenment, he sat under a tree enjoying the state of perfect happiness he had achieved. The tree later became known as the Tree of Enlightenment or the Bodhi tree, and the place is still known as the Buddha Gaya. He spent a further 6 weeks near the tree. It is said that for a whole week he gazed at the tree with gratitude for having sheltered him. At the end of the 7th week, he decided to teach the doctrine, the Dhamma he had discovered. He knew that the Dhamma could not be easily understood and that it had little appeal for ordinary people. Nevertheless, he felt it was his duty to go forth, for there were many whose minds were ready to receive his message. His teachers were dead. Then he remembered the 5 ascetics who had broken away from him. He walked for many days on foot over 100 miles to the deer park at Isipatana near Benares, where the ascetics still practiced the extreme discipline. Seeing him at a distance, they resolved to ignore him. But as the Buddha came closer, they noticed that he had changed. He was majestic and commanding. There was a certain radiance about him. They went forward and greeted him, offered him a seat, and, in the customary manner, fetched water to wash his feet. That evening, on a full moon day in the month of Vesala, July, the Buddha gave his first sermon. He said to the 5 ascetics, "Monks, a recluse should avoid the 2 extremes, the middle way, as I understand and practice it, gives vision and knowledge and leads to enlightenment. The Buddha then explained to them the Four Noble Truths, which form the basis of his teaching. Number 1. There is suffering in the world, like sickness, old age, death, parting from loved ones, and not getting what you want. Number 2. The cause of suffering is desire, or craving based on greed and selfishness. The more we crave, the more unsatisfactory life is. Number 3. To end suffering, desire must be removed, just as a fire dies when no fuel is added. So unhappiness will end when the fuel of craving is removed. Number 4. The way to end suffering is to follow the middle path, or the Noble Eightfold Path, namely, right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. The 5 ascetics, who had highly developed minds, understood his teaching and became his first disciples. The Sangha, or community of monks, was thus formed. The Buddha said, "Go forth, monks, teach this Dhamma, which is excellent in the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. There are some who have only a little dust in their eyes. They will understand." So they set out to spread the Dhamma. The Buddha himself walked from village to village. On one of his journeys to the village of Rajagaha, he saw a herd of deer. A lame fawn was amongst them. The Buddha picked it up and asked the shepherd where he was taking them. "These deer belong to King Bimbisara. They are going to be sacrificed in a sacred fire." The Buddha, carrying the fawn, walked with the shepherd to the king. "O king, killing innocent animals is a cruel deed. It is not the way to happiness." He explained that life is sacred, as the light of Asia beautifully expresses. Of life, which all can take but none can give, life, which all creatures love and strive to keep. Wonderful, dear and pleasant unto each, even to the meanest. The king and his people accepted the teaching and took refuge in the Buddha. When King Suddhodana heard that his son was now at Rajagaha, he sent a messenger to the Buddha that he was getting old and wished to see his son before he died. So the Buddha and his disciples arrived at Kapilavastu, and the people flocked to see their prince. It was 7 years since he had left home. At the palace, he was greeted by his father and other members of the royal family. He preached the Dhamma to them, and they were all convinced of the truth, but not the king. The following morning, the Buddha went begging from house to house for food. The king was greatly upset. "How can you disgrace me so? Why can't you eat in the palace?" "Begging for food is our custom," replied the Buddha. "What custom?" asked the king. "You are no beggar, indeed. You belong to the Sakyan line and clan. You are a prince." "Your Majesty," said the Buddha, "you may claim descent from kings, but mine is from a long line of Buddhas. They always begged for their food." Nevertheless, he gave in to the king's repeated request and had his food in the palace during his stay in Kapilavastu. Up to now, the Buddha had not seen Yasodhara, so he went to her apartments, and when Yasodhara saw him, she fell at his feet and wept. He spoke words of comfort. On the 7th day of his visit to Kapilavastu, Yasodhara addressed her 7 years old son, Rahula, in fine clothes and took him to where the Buddha was. That sage with the golden complexion is your father, she said. Once he had great wealth. Go to him and ask him for your inheritance, for it should be yours now. Rahula did as he was told. The Buddha thought, he wants his inheritance. He thinks of money, jewels, palaces, chariots, weapons and possessions. But I will give him far greater wealth. I shall teach him the way to enlightenment. He asked his chief disciple, Sariputta, to ordering Rahula as a monk. When he heard this, King Suddhodana was very sad and told the Buddha respectfully that he should not order children without the permission of their parents. When you left home without saying goodbye, it made me very unhappy. Then I grew to love Rahula. Now you have taken him too. The Buddha explained the truth he had discovered so simply and persuasively that his father consequently accepted his teaching and many members of the royal family became monks. One of them was Devadatta, his cousin and childhood playmate. He became jealous of the Buddha and tried in many ways to kill him, so that he could lead the Sangha, the community of monks. One day, when the Buddha was seated preaching, Devadatta rolled down a big heavy stone from a great height. But the rock split in two and fell on either side of the Buddha. Another time, he set the drunken elephant, Nalagiri, to attack the Buddha. The raging elephant rushed towards him in a mad fury. The Buddha used his strong mental powers to calm the elephant, which went the kneel down at his feet. Towards the end of Devadatta's life, he repented and went to the Buddha to bring peace to his troubled mind. He fell on his knees before the Buddha and begged for forgiveness and took refuge in the Buddha. The Buddha's fame as a teacher was widespread, and his followers came from all classes of people. Kings and Brahmin, as well as the outcasts and the poor, took refuge in him. Many came to him for advice and comfort. One such was the woman, Kisa Gautami, when her firstborn child died. She was stricken with grief. She carried the body and roamed the streets asking for a medicine to bring back her child to life. People thought she had gone mad. A kind and wise man took her to the Buddha. The Buddha knew how unhappy she was and told her to fetch some mustard seeds. These were commonly used in medicines and were readily available. Kisagoti was relieved. But remember, they must come from houses where nobody has died. If you can bring me a handful, I will restore life to a child. Kisagotami went from house to house, family to family, but they all replied, "Oh, there have been many deaths here. Oh, my husband, oh, my father, oh, my mother, oh, my sister died here recently." She went right through the city without finding a single house where there had been no death. She returned to the Buddha, having released what the great teacher had ordered to her to find out for herself. "That death is common to all. My grief made me blind," she told him. Her mind was ready to receive his teaching. Everything that ever has come into existence, or ever will come into existence, inevitably must and will again pass out of existence. In the whole world, there is only one law, that nothing lasts forever. Soon after King Suddhodana died, Prajapati Gautami, the Buddha's stepmother, came to the Buddha and asked him to ordering her as one of his followers in the same way. As he did, men who formed the Sangha. The Buddha refused to do this even though she begged him for 3 times. Gautami would not be deterred. So along with a number of women from Kapilavastu, she had her hair cut off and put on a yellow robe and followed the Buddha to Vesali, where he was then staying. When they arrived, they were in a bad state with their feet sore and bleeding. Ananda, who was the favorite disciple of the Buddha, saw Gautami waiting and asked her what had happened. When she told him everything, he went to the Buddha and eventually persuaded him to ordering Gautami. All thought the Buddha said that women would understand his highest teaching. He did not want to create an order of nuns because he knew that such an order would only last for 500 years. Because Gautami had looked after him so kindly when he was young, he did ordering her and all the Sakyan women who were with her. But it was as the Buddha said, the order of nuns has not continued in the same way as the Sangha. The Buddha was 35 when he attained enlightenment, and everywhere he went, crowds gathered to see him and hear his teaching. For the next 45 years, he walked with his monks in North and Eastern India teaching the Dhamma. Kings, noblemen, and wealthy merchants generously donated monasteries and parks in which he and his monks could live. In later times, monasteries became palaces of learning, and the Buddha's teaching spread over Asia into lands such as Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, Nepal, Tibet, Mongolia, China, Korea, and Japan. Today, it is the religion of over 500 million people. The cultural advancement of all Buddhist nations was mainly due to his teachings. No arms were used, no wars were fought, and no drop of blood was ever shed in its mission. It spread peaceably due to the love and compassion it taught and its appeal to the reasoning mind. The Buddha advised the Sangha to lead a very simple, calm life in the service of the people. Monks were to have food, clothing, shelter, and medicines, but were not to have luxurious homes or many possessions. For those who follow his teaching, the Buddhist way of life is one of training to be unselfish and to be free from greed. The aged Buddha was dying. He became ill near Kusinara, in modern Uttar Pradesh. While he lay in a grove of saltry, he addressed the monks round him. All things decay. Be mindful. Be righteous and be vigilant. Be lambs unto yourself. Transient are all component things. Therefore, strive earnestly to attain perfection. These were the Buddha's last words. The Buddha passed away at the age of 80. There was to be no more birth or death for him. On the full moon day in the month of Vesak, as the dusk fell in peace and quiet on the birds and animals, the Buddha was cremated with all the pomp and ceremony due to royalty. His relics found their way to many Buddhist countries to be treasured and revered